The sun beat down mercilessly on the arid, desolate land. Dust filled the air, creating a haze that blended with the metallic tang of war. In the middle of this barren landscape marched a small group of soldiers, accompanied by their steadfast companion, Max, a Belgian Malinois with sharp instincts and unwavering focus. His eyes, constantly scanning his surroundings, seemed to sense dangers before they could even materialize. Next to Max was Sergeant Jake Miller, 32 years old, a seasoned explosive ordnance disposal (EOD) expert. Hardened by years in combat zones, Jake moved with the confidence of someone who had faced countless life-threatening situations. He had learned to trust Max's keen senses, an unspoken bond formed through experience, mutual dependence, and survival. Max wasn't just a military dog to Jake. He was a lifeline in the deadly game of disarming explosives. The platoon had been deployed for a reconnaissance mission, tasked with scanning an area notorious for hidden bombs and enemy traps. Every step they took felt heavy, the atmosphere dense with the possibility of unseen danger. While their equipment was advanced, Max was their most vital asset. His nose, trained to detect the faintest whiff of explosives, was their best protection. The terrain was treacherous. Abandoned buildings, shattered by years of conflict, loomed around them like sentinels of destruction. The enemy had left their mark, not through visible presence, but through deadly remnants buried beneath the rubble. These improvised explosive devices, IEDs, were silent killers, and it was Max's job to sniff them out before disaster struck. The platoon moved cautiously, their trust in Max evident with every step. They had seen him in action before. His ability to sense danger had saved their lives on more than one occasion. The men respected him not just as an animal, but as a fellow soldier, as crucial to their mission as any human member of the team. Suddenly, Max's posture changed. His ears perked up and his muscles tensed. Jake noticed immediately, his instincts kicking in. Max's alert was subtle, but unmistakable. Something was wrong. The platoon halted, everyone freezing in place, eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. But Max, with his nose to the ground, had already detected what they could not. Jake gave a quick signal to the group, and the men prepared themselves for what they knew would be a tense situation. They trusted Max, and if he had sensed something, they needed to act accordingly. Approaching cautiously, Jake felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as he knelt by Max's side. Following the dog's lead, he carefully cleared away some debris, revealing a concealed device, an IED, hidden among the ruins. It was a deadly trap, ready to claim anyone who came too close. The air was thick with tension as Jake assessed the bomb. It was more sophisticated than usual, with multiple triggers wired to a second detonator. Any mistake in disarming it could set off a chain reaction. Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead as he began the painstaking process of disarming the explosive, every movement slow and deliberate. Max stayed close, watching every move, his eyes locked on Jake as if offering silent support. The rest of the platoon stood guard, weapons ready, knowing they were in the middle of a well-planned ambush zone. Jake's hands worked steadily, his years of training guiding him through the disarmament. He had been in this position countless times before, but the stakes were always high. Max's calm presence helped keep him focused. He knew that Max would alert him to any further threats in an instant. After what felt like an eternity, Jake successfully disarmed the IED. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment lift just slightly. But he knew the danger wasn't over. There could be more traps, and Max would be their best chance of detecting them before it was too late. As the platoon resumed their march, the bond between Jake and Max felt stronger than ever. They were a team, a lifeline for the men around them, moving forward into the unknown, prepared for whatever dangers lay ahead. The fading light of the setting sun cast long shadows over the landscape, the sky a mix of brilliant oranges and purples. Despite the beauty, the soldiers' nerves were on edge. Dusk often brought danger, and as visibility decreased, the likelihood of an ambush increased. Max, normally steady and focused, suddenly stopped in his tracks. His ears twitched, and his nose lifted slightly into the air, sniffing for a scent that only he could detect. Jake froze immediately, his hand signaling the platoon to halt. The silence was deafening. The soldiers stood still, their breaths barely audible as they waited for Max's next move. Jake had seen this before. Max had detected something, and whatever it wasn't good. Max's attention was locked on a pile of debris near an old, half-destroyed building. His sharp nose had caught the faint scent of explosives buried beneath the rubble. Jake could feel the tension in the air as he crouched beside Max, his senses heightened. The rest of the team remained in position, their weapons trained on the surrounding area, prepared for any sudden attack. With Max's guidance, Jake approached the spot where the dog had stopped. Carefully moving debris aside, Jake's worst fear was confirmed. An IED, well hidden and intricately wired. This was no ordinary bomb. It was part of a larger, more complex network of explosives designed to catch them off guard. The insurgents had been waiting for a patrol like theirs to walk right into their trap. Jake's pulse quickened, but his hands remained steady. Disarming bombs was second nature to him, but the stakes were always high. He couldn't afford to make a mistake, not with so many lives depending on him. Max, ever vigilant, remained by his side, his eyes scanning the horizon for any additional threats. As Jake worked, carefully snipping wires and disabling the detonator, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming. Max's posture had shifted again, his ears now perked up, his body tense as he stared into the distance. It was a signal Jake knew well. There was another danger nearby. Max began to move, sniffing the ground as he followed an invisible trail. Jake watched him closely, knowing that if Max was on the move, there was more to this ambush than just one bomb. Sure enough, Max stopped again, this time near another pile of debris. He began to dig, something he only did when he knew there was imminent danger beneath the surface. Jake's stomach tightened. Another bomb, this one smaller, but no less deadly. It was part of a secondary trigger system, designed to go off if anyone tampered with the primary IED. The enemy had planned their trap meticulously, and without Max's sharp senses, they would have walked right into it. The platoon remained tense, their eyes darting between Jake and Max, fully aware that their lives hung in the balance. Jake crouched down next to the new device, his mind racing. He was dealing with two bombs, both connected to a single trigger. One wrong move, and the entire area could go up in flames. Max stayed close, his presence a steadying force for Jake. The bond between them was unspoken, but unbreakable. They had been through countless missions together, and Jake knew that if anyone could get them out of this situation, it was Max. Carefully, Jake began to disable the second device. His hands moved with precision, but the pressure was immense. The platoon was surrounded, and an ambush could be seconds away. Max, still on high alert, never wavered, his eyes darting back and forth as he sniffed the air, ensuring no new threats approached. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake disarmed both bombs. The relief was palpable, but short-lived. They were still deep in enemy territory, and the insurgents knew they were there. The platoon moved quickly, following Max's lead as he guided them through the minefield of hidden dangers. As they pressed on, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped a deadly trap. Without Max, they wouldn't have stood a chance. And as nightfall approached, they knew the real battle was still ahead. With both bombs defused and a temporary sense of relief washing over the platoon, Jake gave the order to move forward cautiously. Max, the loyal Belgian Malinois, led the group, his sharp senses sniffing the air for any other hidden threats. The tension remained palpable, and though the team was relieved to have avoided the explosions, they knew the path ahead was still dangerous. The landscape was desolate, filled with destroyed buildings and debris scattered everywhere. Max, who who had been their savior by detecting the explosives earlier, was more alert than ever. He sniffed every inch of the ground, and the platoon knew it was crucial to follow his lead. Jake, though relieved to have successfully defused the bombs, remained on edge. He sensed that the enemy could have more surprises in store. As they moved, Max suddenly stopped. His body stiffened, and he began to growl low. His ears perked up, signaling that he had detected something again. Jake, familiar with this behavior, signaled for the platoon to halt. Silence filled the air. The soldiers stood still, barely breathing, as they waited for Max's next move. The dog slowly approached a pile of rubble and began sniffing cautiously. Jake moved closer, his heart racing, already bracing for the worst. Carefully removing the debris with Max by his side, Jake realized it wasn't another bomb. This time, it was something even more alarming. An improvised booby trap, a device rigged with triggers connected to sharp metallic fragments that, if activated, would spray shrapnel in all directions. It wasn't a large explosive, but it would be deadly to anyone nearby. This showed that the enemy was using different tactics to destabilize them and increase the level of threat. Max stayed close to Jake, keeping a watchful eye as Jake analyzed the trap. Disarming it wouldn't be as complex as the previous IEDs, but the risk was still present. Jake began his work, cutting the wires that connected the triggers to the shrapnel. Sweat dripped down his face, but he remained calm. He knew that one mistake would be fatal. As Jake worked on disarming the trap, the other soldiers stood on high alert, making sure they wouldn't be caught off guard by a sudden attack. The tension in the air continued to build, and everyone was aware they were deep in hostile territory. Max, who had been sniffing the area around them, suddenly lifted his head. He moved away from the trap, his body rigid as his nose indicated that he had detected another threat. Jake finished disarming the trap and prepared to follow Max. The dog had moved a short distance away and was now standing near a destroyed building, his eyes fixed on a specific spot. He sniffed the air, and his behavior indicated that something was seriously wrong. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Max never missed anything. As Jake approached cautiously, he noticed that Max was sniffing at something metallic, a thin wire that connected the building to another point farther ahead. The enemy had placed more sophisticated traps, a web of wires and devices ready to trigger a collapse in the already fragile structures. This wasn't just an isolated threat. It was a chain reaction trap capable of causing mass devastation. Jake carefully examined the trap. It wasn't the kind of device he typically disarmed, but he knew he had to be cautious. The wire was taut, and it seemed sensitive to even the slightest movement. One wrong step, and the entire structure could collapse. The platoon was a few meters away, nervously watching as Jake studied the mechanism. Max remained by Jake's side, vigilant, ready to act if necessary. The pressure was intense, but Jake kept his composure. He began cutting the wires that connected the thin wire to the main structure. He knew he had to do this precisely to prevent the wire's tension from releasing suddenly. Max continued to stand guard, sniffing the air around them, as if knowing that every second counted. After several minutes of careful work, Jake finally managed to disable the mechanism. The wire, once taut, was now loose, and the immediate danger seemed to have passed. The platoon exhaled a collective sigh of relief, but everyone knew the mission was far from over. With the path seemingly clear, Jake and Max led the platoon out of the trap-filled area. Max continued to sniff the air, always on high alert, ensuring there were no other hidden threats waiting to strike. The danger was still very real, but Max's presence, with his sharp senses and protective instincts, gave the group confidence that they could overcome any obstacle. As they moved away from the traps, Jake couldn't help but reflect on Max's importance in the mission. Without the dog's keen sense of smell and impeccable training, the platoon would have walked straight into a deadly ambush. Max was more than just a companion. He was their key to survival. As night began to fall, Jake and Max finally reached a safer area where the platoon could rest and reassess their next steps. The mission was far from over, but they knew that with Max by their side, they had a fighting chance of making it out alive.
Before we continue with this exciting story, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and leave a like on this video to always stay up to date with new content.
The sky had darkened, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon. The air was cold, but the tension in the platoon was hotter than ever. Jake had disarmed 2 bombs, but the danger was far from over. Max, always alert, began moving again, his nose to the ground, searching for any remaining threats. Suddenly, Max stopped, his ears perked up, his body tense. Jake knew immediately that something was wrong. Max had detected something, and whatever it was close. The platoon froze, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Max moved cautiously, his nose leading him to a small pile of debris near the edge of the perimeter. He began digging, something he only did when he knew there was imminent danger. Jake's heart raced. Another bomb. But this one was different. As Jake approached, he realized that Max had found a secondary explosive device, smaller, but connected to the primary bomb he had just disarmed. It was part of a larger, more complex trap designed to take out anyone who tried to disarm the main explosive. Jake's mind raced. The situation had just become much more dangerous. He would need to disarm both bombs simultaneously or risk triggering a massive explosion. The pressure was immense, but he knew he had no choice. The lives of his men depended on him. Max stayed close, his eyes locked on the bomb. He knew what needed to be done, and Jake trusted him completely. But the situation was becoming more dangerous by the second. The enemy could be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jake began working on the secondary bomb, his hands steady but his heart pounding in his chest. Every second felt like an eternity as he carefully disconnected wires, trying to disable the device without triggering the primary explosive. Suddenly, Max let out a low growl. Jake looked up, his eyes scanning the area. There was movement in the distance. Enemy soldiers were approaching. They were out of time. Jake's mind raced. He needed to finish disarming the bomb, but the enemy was closing in. Max, sensing the danger, moved closer to the bomb. He sniffed the wires, his eyes focused on the device. Without warning, Max lunged forward, grabbing one of the wires with his teeth. Jake's heart stopped. What was he doing? But before he could react, Max had pulled the wire, disabling the bomb in one swift motion. The explosion was small but powerful enough to throw Max backward. He landed hard, his body limp on the ground. Jake's heart sank. Max had sacrificed himself to save the platoon. The enemy soldiers were closing in, but Jake didn't care. He rushed to Max's side, his heart pounding in his chest. Max was alive, but barely. His body was battered, and his breathing was shallow. Jake's hands shook as he tried to assess the damage. Max had saved them all, but at what cost? The enemy was still approaching, but all Jake could think about was Max. He couldn't lose him. Not now. The platoon moved quickly, setting up a defensive perimeter to hold off the enemy while they waited for the medical team to arrive. Jake stayed by Max's side, his heart heavy with guilt. Max had given everything to protect them, and now it was up to them to save him. As the sound of the helicopter grew louder, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. The medical team would take Max to safety, but there was still so much uncertainty. Would Max survive? Would he ever be the same? The helicopter landed, and Jake carefully lifted Max onto the stretcher. His heart was heavy, but his resolve was strong. Max had saved them all, and now it was their turn to save him. As the helicopter lifted off, Jake watched as the base faded into the distance. He didn't know what the future held for Max, but one thing was certain. He would never forget the sacrifice Max had made. The helicopter tore through the night sky, carrying Max to the base where he would receive immediate medical care. Jake watched the red lights of the aircraft disappear into the darkness, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Max's sacrifice had saved their lives, but the uncertainty about his condition gnawed at him. The platoon, silent, was also shaken. Everyone knew that without the dog, the outcome would have been much different. Back at the base, the hours that followed were long and exhausting. Jake, though physically and mentally drained, couldn't rest. His thoughts were with Max, and he desperately awaited news about the dog's condition. The military doctors were doing everything they could to stabilize his loyal companion, but the injuries were serious, and Jake knew the recovery wouldn't be easy. The sergeant spent the time replaying every detail of the mission in his mind. From the moment Max detected the first explosive to the instant he sacrificed his own safety to disarm the secondary device. Jake knew he had done his best, but the pain of seeing his partner injured made him question the decisions he'd made that night. The silence of the military base was interrupted only by the occasional sound of vehicles and the hurried footsteps of soldiers. That night, however, everyone's focus was on Max, the hero who had protected the platoon. The unit commander, informed of the events, decided to visit Jake. When he arrived, he found the sergeant deep in thought, sitting at a table in the barracks. Jake's face was marked by exhaustion, but his eyes still carried the worry for Max. The commander approached, placing a firm hand on Jake's shoulder, acknowledging the weight he carried. He did what he was trained to do, Jake. Max saved all of us, said the commander in a tone of recognition. The words, though comforting, did little to ease the guilt Jake felt for having seen his loyal partner in such a state. Max wasn't just a military dog. He was part of the platoon's family, an essential member of the missions, and his sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. Hours later, the military veterinarian finally entered the barracks where Jake waited. His face was serious, but not desperate. Max is going to survive, he said. The words, so simple, lifted a great weight off Jake's heart. The dog had undergone a complicated surgery to repair the damage from the explosion, but was stable and had a good chance of recovery. The relief was immediate, and Jake, who had barely allowed himself to breathe during the long wait, finally exhaled. Max still needed a lot of time to fully recover, but the fact that he had survived was reason enough to celebrate. Jake was allowed to visit Max at the base's veterinary hospital the next day. He was eager to see his companion, feeling a mix of gratitude and respect for what Max had done that night. When Jake entered the room, he saw Max lying on an improvised bed, bandages covering parts of his body. The dog's eyes, though tired, lit up when he sensed Jake's presence. Despite being injured, Max's tail tried to wag, as if to say that despite everything, he was okay. Jake knelt beside him, gently running his hand through Max's fur. "You were incredible, partner," he murmured. Max, with half-closed eyes, seemed to understand every word. As Jake stroked Max, he couldn't help but think about everything they had been through together. Every mission, every tense moment, and now this ultimate sacrifice. The bond between them was stronger than ever. Max wasn't just a hero to Jake, but to the entire platoon, who had heard of Max's recovery and were eager to honor the loyal companion. In the days that followed, Max was treated like the hero he was. The story of his bravery quickly spread throughout the base, and soon reached other platoons and commands. The courage of the Belgian Malinois was recognized by everyone, and the entire platoon felt the need to honor the dog for his dedication and sacrifice. A ceremony was organized to honor Max. Soldiers, officers, and veterinarians gathered to celebrate the heroic deed of the dog. Jake stood by Max's side the entire time, feeling immense pride for his partner. During the ceremony, Max was awarded a Medal of Honor, one of the highest decorations a military animal could receive. It was a symbolic but important recognition of his sacrifice and loyalty. Max, still recovering, lay down, watching with his keen eyes everything happening around him. He didn't fully understand what was being celebrated, but felt the affection and respect from everyone around him. The soldiers, who once saw him as just a working dog, now revered him as the hero he truly was. Jake, with the medal in hand, looked at Max with tears in his eyes, remembering every detail of that night. He knew that, without Max, neither he nor his platoon would be there. The courage and sacrifice of his canine companion had saved them all, and that debt could never be repaid. As the ceremony continued, Jake approached Max and pinned the medal to his collar, gently stroking the dog who, even injured, had remained strong and loyal until the end. The soft morning sunlight shone over the base, illuminating the start of another day for the soldiers. However, today, all the focus was on Max. The Belgian Malinois, still in recovery, had become a true legend at the base. Stories of his bravery and sacrifice had spread quickly, turning the dog into a symbol of courage and loyalty. Soldiers who had never crossed paths with Max now recognized him, speaking with admiration about what he had done for Jake's platoon. To Jake, however, Max had always been more than a hero. He was his companion, the one who stood by his side during dangerous missions and, without hesitation, risked his own life to save everyone. The bond between the two, already strong, now seemed unbreakable. Max's recovery was progressing faster than expected, and each day brought signs of improvement. Max was still bandaged and had limited movement, but his energy was beginning to return. He could already walk short distances, and his appetite had returned to normal. Even injured, the dog maintained his protective instinct, carefully watching any movement around Jake and the platoon. It was as if he knew that, despite his recovery, his job wasn't over yet. The military base, impressed by Max's story, decided to organize an official ceremony in the dog's honor. The commander, moved by Max's sacrifice and Jake's loyalty, led the preparations. It was rare for an animal to receive such high recognition, but Max's actions deserved to be acknowledged. He had become a symbol of bravery for everyone serving in that unit. Jake closely followed every step of Max's recovery. Daily visits to the base veterinary hospital became part of his routine. He knew that a full recovery would take time, but Max's progress was steady. In quiet moments, Jake reflected on how different the mission's outcome could have been without Max's presence. The gratitude he felt for his canine partner ran deep, and he promised himself that he would never forget what Max had done for him and the other soldiers that night. On the day of the ceremony, the base was in a celebratory mood. Soldiers and officers gathered in the central courtyard, all eager to pay tribute to the canine hero. Jake's platoon stood at the front, proud to see Max receive the recognition he deserved. Jake, dressed in his formal uniform, walked beside Max, who, despite the bandages, held his head high with dignity. His eyes gleamed with alertness and understanding. The ceremony was marked by emotional speeches, highlighting the importance of military dogs in combat operations. The commander praised Max for his courage, reminding everyone that without him, the platoon would have faced a tragedy. The atmosphere was one of respect and gratitude, and everyone present knew they were in the presence of a true hero. When the moment came, Jake fastened the medal to Max's collar as the platoon and other soldiers applauded in recognition. Max, ever alert, looked at Jake with those loyal eyes that had followed him through so many missions. The dog's tail wagged slowly, as if he understood that this tribute was for him. The sacrifice he had made, facing death to save his companions, was now being officially recognized. After the ceremony, Jake took Max to a quieter spot, away from the base's hustle. They sat side by side at a point where they could see the horizon, with the mountains in the distance. The wind blew softly, and Jake, stroking Max's head, reflected on everything they had been through together. Every mission, every tense moment, and now this ultimate sacrifice. Max wasn't just a military dog. He was family, a partner who would always stand by Jake's side, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Jake knew that Max's time on the battlefield was coming to an end. The dog had fulfilled his mission with more bravery than any soldier could expect. Now it was time for him to rest. The veterinarian had recommended that Max retire from active duty, something Jake had already been considering. The hero deserved a peaceful life after everything he had faced. As they watched the sunset, Jake felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that, no matter where they went from here, Max would always be by his side. The dog's sacrifice, loyalty, and courage would be remembered forever, not only by Jake, but by everyone who had witnessed what he had done. That afternoon, Jake made a decision. Max would retire, but he wouldn't leave Jake's life. He would return home with him, living out his days in peace, far from the battlefields, but always by the side of the partner who loved and respected him more than words could express. Max, the war hero, had fulfilled his mission, and now it was time to enjoy the tranquility he had so deserved.
Thanks for watching until the end. What did you think of today's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Until next time.